Today on some various issues, but one, of course, what's going on with the coronavirus and what is new there. And we're going to talk a little bit about Melinda Gates because she's in the news, and she said something that reminded me of something that Fauci said not a long time ago, and that is, matter of fact, I think this came up. It might have even been with Rand. Pushing Fauci on the ramifications of lockdown. Somewhere along the way, though, Fauci said, well, we really didn't give much consideration to the downside of what we were doing. And that's a sort of an understatement. But Melinda came up with a similar statement over the weekend. And it was, she said that they had not thought through the economic impact of some of their recommendations. And I think they didn't think through a lot of implications because maybe their goals were different and maybe they were concentrating on that and maybe they still are. But the economic and also the civil libertarian impact of what they have advised and supported is hurting a lot of people. Matter of fact, it's becoming a much bigger subject. And today, there was a lot more trust 6-8 months ago. Government knows best and will do whatever they say. There's still a lot of people that way because they want to believe and they need somebody to help them. But there's a lot of other people now that are saying, now that the vaccine's available, is it going to work? And how much is this going to really cost? And what really is going on? So it's a welcome opportunity for us to have Melinda saying something. This was a report in AIEC. Jeff Tucker had this article. But Daniel, I think it's enlightening to know exactly what some of these individuals who promote all this stuff are actually thinking. And I think this is a true statement from what Melinda just said.
Well, this, excuse me, sir, I think this points to a larger crisis in our society, which is that the elites, most of them unelected, who somehow find themselves with the ability to make policy for the rest of us, are so completely divorced, so completely isolated from the effects of the things they recommend, from the things that they say, that society is at, I think, a crisis point. And Melinda Gates, when she said we hadn't thought this through, it wasn't necessarily about the lockdown. She was talking about the pandemic. But as Jeff Tucker points out in the article that we're talking about, essentially these elites who are so completely separate, they live such separate lives, they live lives of unbelievable luxury and guarantee of salary. A look at Fauci himself for decades has been on the government payroll. He doesn't have to worry about his job. His restaurant is not going to close because he doesn't have one. Bill and Melinda Gates don't have to worry about a restaurant closing because they're fabulously wealthy. Basically, they look at this pandemic as Tucker says, like a playground where they get to play around on the policies they thought about without any thought to the impact on the rest of the country. And that is the real crisis we're facing. Thousands, tens of thousands of restaurants closed forever, a suicide epidemic, a depression and mental health epidemic, a physical health epidemic because the lockdowns are causing people physical harm. Yet still, when you look at the overall deaths per year versus the deaths that we've had this year, there's not a huge impact, thankfully, in terms of actual bodies. Yes, people are dying. It's terrible. It's tragic. We know about it personally. It's horrible. However, we're not seeing a black plague here in terms of this pandemic. What we're seeing a black plague in society itself. The DNA of our society itself is experiencing a black plague, and people like Melinda Gates and Tony Fauci are so completely separate in their experience from what the rest of us have that they just simply don't understand it.
When Bill's name came up when Melinda was talking, she said that he has concerns, and they're very simplified and in some ways could be legitimate, but under these circumstances, I think there's something more going on, because she said that Bill says the only concern is about the virus and the vaccine. Well, and she used the word only, and that's his main concern. And I guess if you're in that business, but his business is not developing the vaccine. His business is in social organization and spending money and having knowing how to promote a lockdown of society. And they don't think about it, so he probably doesn't. But I think his goals might be different. Nobody knows exactly what his real goals are and what her goals are. But I tell you what. The results have been very, very bad because I don't think there's any doubt about it that more people are going to suffer the consequences financially and health-wise from the lockdown and the overreaction to the endemic, endemic that they're dealing with, because there's so many unknowns, the nature of the virus, the nature of the testing that they have done, and really the benefit of masks, all these kind of things. There's more questions than answers, and yet they keep pursuing it, and there's no let up. And we'll mention a few more cases today of how aggressive some of the countries are getting and how ridiculous that some of these rules are. At the same time, we also see the number of people that are saying, this is enough. I'm going out and I'm just going to the beach or something like that. They're getting sick and tired of it. So there's a contest going on, and the people who toe the line, do this not with malice as much as just a misunderstanding that, well, I can't take on my government. I have to cooperate. They have to do this. Everything they're doing is for a good purpose. And but then there's others who are saying, no way, this is more harm than it's good. So that this has to be settled. If it continues as it is right now, there's the segment over there that are just planning more and more vaccines. Well, if they solve the problem of coronavirus, there'll be another one. We just have the flu. We can deal with the flu. It's on and on. It's this whole issue. They're obsessed with control of people, which is the opposite of what happens in a free society, and it is the opposite of what a lot of us would recommend if we had much to say about how to handle a viral infection that has spread. At least we would look for the truth of the matter.
Well, as the article that we're talking about points out, Bill Gates has spent $500 million since the pandemic began. $500 million pushing his view of what we should do about it. And the rest of us, we can't compete with that. These are fabulously, incomprehensibly wealthy people. And what does he do? He funds academic departments. He funds labs. He funds the so-called experts. And they all say what he tells them to say. And so we're all facing the backlash. We're all facing the consequences of a decision made by one fabulously wealthy person who knows where to put his money. He's no dummy. And as you say, he doesn't necessarily have malice at heart, but he's not omniscient. He's not God. He's not the master of the universe. He's not the king of the country. But somehow, with being able to spend $500 million funding his view of what should be done has enormous impact. And the rest of us, trying to organize a little protest to keep the restaurants open, that's about what people can do. And I think that's why people, Dr. Paul, seem so bewildered. Nobody knows what to do in the face of such unbelievable wealth and power being used as a weapon against average people. I don't think it's ever happened in history.
Unfortunately, it's happening now, and it's going to continue unless we convert people over to thinking there's an alternative, and that the conditions in this world aren't quite as they picture them. It isn't the end of the world, because when you sort a lot of this out, you find that the deaths that are occurring. Yes, it's not the data is not clear. It confuses people, but that is on purpose. Because I want to talk a minute or two, Daniel, about what's going on in Canada, because I keep thinking, I remember Canada so well about the 1960s, because of the Vietnam War, and there was a growing resentment, and it was getting violent here, and people didn't want to fight in the streets, and they didn't want drafted, and thousands of Americans being killed. I mean, we have problems right now, but all you have to do is think about what was going on back in the 60s, where it ended up nearly 60,000 Americans were killed. Now, that's a problem. But Canada was a haven. They had a reputation for having some beliefs in civil liberties, and a lot of Americans went up there. And I can remember later on, Congress finally, excused the ones that went up there. But at the time, it was very, very controversial, and there's some people in this country still are pretty annoyed that that happened. Of course, when governments do things illegal and start illegal wars, resisting it shouldn't be considered treasonous. That's why it's important this be sorted out. But the health minister in Canada has suggested that they would like and use the vaccine as a method of controlling people's travel. Ultimately, we've talked about this, people have mentioned this, but this is sort of in the planning stage in Canada. It's not going to happen next week, but it's something that once they start talking about it, be concerned, because this would be an internal passport, out of the country type passport, and whether it's put it within the vaccine or what, that remains to be seen. Some people would like that. Others would just say you have to have proof that you've taken the vaccine or you can't travel. Now, that's a threat. That said, that means you just can't travel. That's no big deal. But that's exactly like right now going on. You stay in your house. That's prison. When you tell people they can't move, they have been imprisoned. And that's what they're talking about up there. So there's never, the discussion isn't ever about due process. So there was never due process for the Japanese when they were locked out to the tune of thousands during World War II without due process. And so it isn't just in these recent years that we in the group of libertarianism that we work with, we haven't invented the concern about violations of civil liberties. I mean, it's been going on for a long time, like World War I, Civil War, and we're also in the Vietnam War. So that is that to me is important. The lockdown. That's a vicious violation of your property rights and the rights, your personal liberty. But there's no due process. It's these little dictators coming along. So I think that people have concentrated, just on bigger government as it grows. Because I was in that category at one time that, the states should have more rights, and the federal government's growing too big and this sort of thing. But all of a sudden it became an international event. We ended up going to war under the United Nations. We distribute economic wealth through international financial organizations. But it always boils down to the violation of the individual. And that could solve so many problems. But right now, Canada is not the champion of personal liberties as they had a reputation for back in the 1960s. So hopefully we can make people think about this as a civil libertarian issue and not saying, well, is it going to do any good? Is that going to solve the problem? And if they did that and did it objectively, it wouldn't be so bad, because the truth is on the side of the people that's saying there's way too much activity and the medical and economic benefits just aren't there.
Yeah, the Canada situation is troubling because it might be the model that the U.S. bases on. And the real problem, as you point out, Dr. Paul, is these unelected health ministers and health directors. We have it from the state of Pennsylvania to Los Angeles County to Canada to elsewhere. These are people who only view things through a very simple lens, And these are people who now also have enormous public policy power. They have the power to force people to stay at home and to end their lives as they know it. And it's dangerous to have that much power. So what Canada has done, according to what we're reading, and this is the health minister for Ontario in Canada, she said, hey, we're not going to mandate the vaccine. It's totally voluntary. Don't worry about it. But guess what? If you don't get it, if you don't have it, if you can't prove when you've got it, then you can't go out. You can't go to a theater. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go out of your house. This is torture. This is this is maniacal torture on the part of these officials, and it's extremely dangerous to the country, Dr. Paul.
Yes, and we've been quoting and referencing an article that was in Zero Hedge, and it was written by Steve Watson, originally by the Summit News. And he concludes this article by mentioning something that is in itself very scary too. He references about a Wall Street Journal article on Saturday, and he said, and he was a former Center for Disease Control and Prevention Director, Tom Frieden, who is writing this, noted that he expects the so-called immunity passports will come into widespread use despite any ethical, legal, or operational challenges, and despite the fact that it hasn't at all been determined whether the vaccine equates to immunity. This, I think, is more of a warning than a proposal, but that's a sound warning, because that's the kind of thing that we fear could happen. Daniel? Well, I think maybe our internet cut us off. So I'm going to go on to a subject that we had planned to talk about as well. And we were going to make mention, is not exactly on the virus. This has to do with the court case that has been started by the District Attorney of Texas, Paxton. And he's filed this suit, and it looks like he's going to have it heard in the Supreme Court, and that's coming up. Now, he did that alone in the name of Texas, but he was filing, against Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And the whole issue that he's talking about is the issue of who can change the rules. And when can they change the rules of who gets to vote, and how long can the counts last? And we've heard so much of this going on. Oh yeah, 24 hours. That's so old-fashioned. You can't be overly rigid. The Constitution shouldn't be so rigid. You got to be flexible. Let them vote any time they want. Now it's up to a week or 3 weeks or whenever the mail comes in and whatnot. So it's totally out of control from my viewpoint of what's happened in this last election. But subsequently, Daniel, I understand there are more states have joined in this case, and there's a chance that this may well have a significant impact once they rule on this.
17 states have joined Texas in this lawsuit, and the Attorney General of Texas makes a very good point that this affects my state. We voted a certain way, and because you seem to have changed the rules in a non-constitutional fashion, meaning that your state legislator didn't make a law, you had courts and you had other things overruled. You affect our vote. You affect our vote here in Texas. You affect the outcome of the election. And the fact that 17 states have joined it, I think, Dr. Paul, is significant. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but the point is, if half of America does not have any faith whatsoever in our ability to kick out people from office we don't like or elect people we do like, then, even those of us who are not super keen on elections, we've got a real problem.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And I always go back to an issue that I've been working on and concerned about, because I think it's a universal type of issue about ignoring the law and not following the rules, and that is on the monetary issue. And there hasn't been much interest in that decades ago when I decided, I thought this is a big deal. And yet the consequence economically, they remain, and they're there, and more people understand that, and they understand the relationship of the Federal Reserve. So yes, it's a frustrating battle, and yet it takes time, and I think we're in the process of that. So let's hope more people wake up and say it's the issue of liberty, and it's the issue of big government, and the danger of government acting on its own without really any input from the people. So there's a lot to be determined, and we'll do our best to expose them for what they are. Daniel, I'm going to go on. We have two other items I wanted to go over with, and in some way they're a little bit more entertaining. Some others, even how ridiculous they are. But I want to start with Russia.
Yeah.
I understand they like alcohol in Russia, especially when they were the Soviet system. They were extreme drinkers. And the drinking in this country is going up, and I keep thinking, are we going to be like the Soviet Union? Because they lived under there, and they depended on vodka and everything else. And I understand they don't drink quite as much, but anyway, they're going to try, there's going to be an attempt to tie the vaccine along with alcohol. And the way I understand it, Daniel, is that if you get a vaccine, and I think the Russian government hasn't turned libertarian. I think they're talking about, telling you have to have it. And and this is not a penalty, but it's a warning that once you get the shot, it doesn't mix well with alcohol, so don't drink any alcohol for 6 weeks. They didn't use the word don't, but they're warning. They say alcohol's not good, so it'd probably be you're going to be advised don't drink any alcohol, because I don't imagine even the advice would carry much weight. But it's interesting that what if they take it seriously? Maybe this will be a blessing in disguise. Maybe a lot less people will pick the alcohol over the vaccine, but who knows?
Yeah, it is. It sort of ties in with what we were saying yesterday about the vaccine, that there are so many things coming out about, theirs is obviously different than the ones we were talking about yesterday, the Pfizer vaccine. But what they're saying is that for 42 days, you can't drink. You still have to wear a mask. You have to avoid crowded places. You have to do all these things because it's going to take so much time for this vaccine to take effect. And what's really interesting is President Putin, to this point at least, has refused to take the vaccine. He will not take the Russian vaccine. To this point, he doesn't want it. He thinks it's unreliable. And they also said that for the Russian vaccine, at least, people who are taking immunosuppressant drugs, they shouldn't get the vaccine. So all of a sudden, you're getting rid of all the people who've had transplants, all the people who have HIV, and many other disorders are now all of a sudden, in addition to in the U.S., they say if you've got allergies, you shouldn't take it. You're having huge categories of people that they're already warning about this vaccine. So what's that going to do to people's confidence in this vaccine, especially when they say, hey, even if you get it, you got to keep the mask on. So it's just another indication, Dr. Paul, that I don't think these people really have a good idea what they're doing. And as you mentioned many times, it looks a little bit more like 1976 with the swine flu vaccine. I don't know that we've made much progress since then.
Yeah, there was a neat little story, because some people will get a chuckle out of it, which I did, that Bob Wenzel put up on Target Liberty. But he had a picture of two wrestlers, and they're high school kids, and they're in Ohio. And you can tell they're really involved. They had their tights on, so there's the bare arms and bare legs. There's a lot of skin there, and they're almost rolled up in a ball, clenched and wrestling like crazy. And the whole thing is they had a little bit of discussion about this on whether or not wrestlers should be allowed to wrestle with COVID. All around, it's too dangerous. So they got a ruling on it. In this case, it wasn't as ridiculous as not letting people play football and these other things. They say, oh, no, it's okay to wrestle, but there's only one thing you have to be careful with, and we have to exclude it. You're not allowed to shake hands with your opponent. and all of a sudden it's going to be okay. This ought to be an indication that they're not working with many facts, on what they're trying to do. But it's there, so maybe they'll make sure. Then they'll say, nobody got COVID. That's because they didn't shake hands. So.
Of all things wrestling, you are definitely in close quarters when you're wrestling,
yeah.
If you're doing it the right way. So, and it's just another example, Dr. Paul, of things that don't make sense. And I think more and more people are waking up and saying, hey, hang on a minute. What you said about this doesn't seem to make sense. So hopefully people will, even though we get a chuckle out of it, hopefully it will undermine what the totalitarians are trying to do.
one. I want to close, Daniel, on an item that I found, and it caught my eye because it is dealing with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. It just happens to be the place where I did my OBGYN residency. And I thought, well, because I knew the school had some liberal beliefs, I thought, well, I wasn't expecting anything real positive, but I shouldn't have been so skeptical. Because even the title tells us what's going on. University of Pittsburgh Medical Center won't require staff to take COVID-19 vaccine due to, quote, general uncertainty. And I think, well, there it is. Now, that's an understatement about general uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's building. Every single day it's getting worse. But general uncertainty, and it's a shame that this is news, that people are allowed to maybe make their own decision. They say, well, if you want to take it, you can take it, and this sort of thing. But no, they're going to allow them to make up their choices. And right now, it's almost the opposite around the country, because it's the medical personnel that get it first. If we're going to have a guinea pig, give it to the medical personnel. I want to mix these different vaccines, like they're getting ready to mix them up, and the promoters, the so-called intellectual promoters, the professors at the universities, they should be taking this stuff, because quite frankly, I have a suspicion that they probably don't take these vaccines.
And I think it's significant, Dr. Paul, because the University of Pittsburgh, they do require their health workers to take a flu shot every year. But what they've said, the medical director said, until we learn more and build on our own experience with this vaccine, it's not the right thing to make it mandatory. So that's very interesting. I wonder if they're worried about liability. I wonder what the implications are. But, it is a good sign in a way that they're not forcing their people to take something that has been untried and untested. We know the 2 people involved in the trials have died so far. There are articles, we've seen it on Target Liberty and elsewhere, about different facial paralysis and different side effects people are having. If you want to take it, as we say, Dr. Paul, if you want to take it, that's great. Maybe there are people who should take it. We don't know. But the idea of making it mandatory, giving health passports and giving vaccine passports, that really shouldn't be what America is about. So hopefully some groundswell will start building of people who want to have control over their own lives again, Dr. Paul.
That is what we're looking for, and I guess we'd like to think that we're contributing to this general uncertainty about the automatic acceptance of and enthusiasm for vaccines without coming down on an authoritarian approach of thou shalt not do it, you can't do it. The market and freedom can make these decisions. Individuals should make them. And parents for decades now have defended against compulsory inoculations and cocktails for their children. And many claim that there have been serious complications from those innocent, benign inoculations that the children get. I've seen children who have ended up with severe problems having gotten those shots. Yeah, the percentage is low, but if it's a danger and you're the parent and you're responsible, you should help make that decision. But basically, individuals should be making these decisions as they should do in all walks of life. That makes all the difference. I keep repeating the same theme that if people, the left always said, well, people won't act right. They don't take care of themselves. They don't go to school and all this. So they see that, and then they say, I'm going to make them do that. But then when you look at it, you take people out of the community, and you think you're going to pick the cream of the crop and put them in Washington, D.C., who's going to dictate these rules and make everything all right, which doesn't happen. Hayek said the worst rise to the top in a political system like we have. And boy, all you have to do is thinking about, who's in the public health service. That used to be benign enough. Well, it doesn't sound like they're really harmful, the more sophisticated they, even for years, have always challenged, the national public health systems. But now it's worse than ever because it's part of, it's not the military-industrial complex, it's the medical-industrial complex. There's a lot of money, the FDA and the drug companies. It's time for real reform there. And hopefully that'll be one of the consequences of all this debate that's going on, and that people will decide that the overkill and the lockdowns have been detrimental. I do want to really emphasize our appreciation here at the Liberty Report for all of you that turn in and watch our program. And we hope you come back to the Liberty Report soon.